Yours, Mine, and Ours from 1968, starring Henry Fonda and Lucille Ball. I have never seen this before until now. And this is sort of considered to be a classic comedy, family comedy kind of movie. And the basic plot is woman got a lot of kids, man got a lot of kids. They both marry each other, now they've got even more kids. That's the plot of the movie, essentially. But I love Lucy, that's right, don't you forget. That's the very same. But yeah, let's look at the Rotten Tomatoes. So it's got a 54% on Rotten Tomatoes, which isn't great. It's sort of, the critics seem to be half and half on it. But then 80% audience score, so this is clearly a beloved family favorite. The kids love this one. The moms and the dads, they love this one. And I didn't hate it, but I do have some gripes with it. I do think it's better than the Steve Martin Cheaper by the Dozen. But that's a kind of low bar, honestly. Let's read some more shit here. A leering, uncertain, embarrassing, protracted little comedy neatly divided into television intercommercial periods, each terminated by an abysmal, inevitable joke, quite anti-sex and pro-compulsive procreation. I mean, yeah, yes and no, I would say. Yes and no. There is... Well, they have the people with all the kids. They also have a lot of characters being like, I wouldn't fucking want to have that many kids. So they do make it clear that this isn't the norm. So I don't know if I fully agree with that synopsis. As a genuinely amusing family film, it will do nicely. That's a Roger Ebert review, 3.5 out of 4. That's pretty high rating, actually. It's a little bit of a stretch to accept 57-year-old Ball and 63-year-old Fonda as fertile parents. Yeah, I didn't realize that was how old she was. He seems a little older than she does in this movie, but I think you can suspend your disbelief a little bit. It is a movie. They still give it a positive review. They still make for believable parents once you get over the initial shock. Fair enough. I think I kind of agree with that to a certain extent, but it didn't. I don't think it bothered me as much as this guy. Forget that awful 2005 version starring Dennis Quaid and Rene Russo. For the real deal, check out the delightful 1968 original. Yeah, because there's another one. That's the one that I heard about, and that's the one that I knew about. I didn't even know that there was an original, that this movie existed until like a few weeks ago, actually, when I put it on the list. Someone was like, oh, you should watch the original Yours, Mine, and Ours from 1968. I was like, oh, I never saw it. I put it on the list, just as I've never seen the other one. I will keep the title on the list just in case. One day we'll maybe review the 2005 one, we'll see. The movie's far from engrossing atmosphere is compounded by its excessively deliberate pace. Yeah, fair enough. The two cutesy stories almost saved by stars Lucille Ball and Henry Fonda, who are perfect as the mature, awkward seekers of a second love. They say almost, so it wasn't good enough. Ooh, let's read one more bad review, one more good review. At one point, the pig swallows a mobile phone. Why couldn't it have eaten the movie's master print? I think this was a mix-up. I think this is a review of the other one. Because there's no pig in this one. There's a pig in I know that there's a pig in the other one, though. So this wasn't even fucking for the right movie. I guarantee you that someone made that mistake and put this on here by accident. Because there's no pig in this movie. So that's fucking not correct. That's not an accurate rating. That's not fair. That's tarnishing this movie's reviews. That's not fair. Someone should send Rotten Tomatoes a message. Ooh, if they'd even fucking respond. Impossible, no Gustavo. This one's in fucking French or something. Desta immensa familia es su problemas tu apetecos. I don't know what the fuck that means, but they liked it. Moving on, let's get away from the Rotten Tomatoes. Now, isn't that the Brady Bunch plot? I mean, it's the plot of a lot of these things. It seems to be a genre. the genre where there's a family with a bunch of fucking kids. Same with Cheaper by the Dozen, right? But this one is slightly different because it's the two different families coming together. So I do like that aspect of this one over Cheaper by the Dozen, at least the one I've seen. I can't speak to the original film because it's generally beloved, and I haven't seen the 1950 Cheaper by the Dozen. Ooh, yeah, check them biscuits. It sounds yummy. Shiver me biscuits. Okay, anyways, let's check out the IMDb page for Yours, Mine, and Ours. 7.1 out of 10, pretty solid rating. Like we said, it's a pretty beloved family film. Lucille Ball, Henry Fonda, main characters. Van Johnson. I don't think I really recognize anybody else. Excuse me. Let's see here. Oh, why is my nose getting so itchy? Let's read the storyline, even though I kind of explained it. When a widower with 10 children marries a widow with 8, can the 20 of them get together as a big family? From finding a house big enough for all of them to learn making 18 school lunches, to coping with the son going to war and an unexpected new addition to the family. This film attempts to blend two families into one and hopes to answer the question, is bigger really better? I guess so. I mean, I don't guess that it's better, but I guess that's the question they're posing. I mean, oh my goodness, why is my nose driving me crazy? Just a second, folks. Whew, okay. We'll get right back into it here. Exciting stuff. And yeah, budget 25 million. I mean 2.5 million. 25 million, maybe adjusted for inflation. I don't really know the math on that. Probably not that high. But yeah, and it doesn't have the box office information. It just has the budget. So I have no idea. I feel like it probably did make its money back though, because it's a beloved classic to some. Not the critics apparently. But yeah, let's look at my notes here on this one. Let's see what we gotta say. Fun animated intro. A lot of these movies from the 50s and 60s had intros like this, but I usually like them, and I like this one. Heavy Navy involvement. The Navy paid for a lot of this movie, I think. It's very pro-Navy. Because the main character is in the Navy, and so is Lucille's husband who died, and then she marries Frank, Henry Fonda, who again is also in the Navy. My next note is watching French movie with no subtitles. They're both doing this simultaneously at the same time in different places, watching this movie, Henry Fonda and Lucille Ball, and they're both watching it without subtitles. I mean, I guess you could, but it seems a little weird, and also fluky that they both happen to be. How do they know what they're saying? I don't think they do. Anyway, moving on. Guy who calls mom ridiculous is a bitch. Yeah, because Lucille Ball, she's got a fake eyelash and it falls off and it's like on her forehead. And some asshole at the bar is just like, ridiculous. It's like, what? How about don't be a cunt? How about be not mean? But no, he's just fucking right out of the gate. Ridiculous. It's like, fuck you, you know? You don't know what she's been going through. Leave her alone. I don't know, I think that's mean. Time to eat, be back after, enjoy the biscuits and whatnot. Sounds delectable. My next note is, smoking was more acceptable then, and does this movie ever show it? People are smoking just like in hospitals and everywhere, and it's crazy. But anyway, moving on. Says she gets sick on cable cars very suddenly. Excuse me. But they're on a cable car, and then she's like, I get sick on cable cars, and then gets sick. It just seemed like a weird timing for that joke. I didn't think it was funny, and it seemed weird to me. Moving on. Fourth wall broken by friend Daryl. This seems weird because I guess you could say that the other characters do break the wall. Frank, the mom, Lucille and Henry Fonda, but they're just doing a narration. Their friend Daryl actually talks to the camera, and I think that's kind of weird because the movie's not about him, he's a side character. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, I just thought it was kind of different. It didn't bug me, I just thought it was kind of interesting. Moving on, he set up mom with a worse date than the dad. So Daryl is trying to basically get them jealous of each other by putting Frank on a date with some woman and then put Lucille on a date with some woman. With some man, and then they go send them to the same restaurant and they see each other and there's that whole scene. But the man that they set Lucille Ball up with is not the same quality as the woman they set Frank up with. It's not fair. And he seems like real sleazy and kind of an asshole. And yeah, the woman they set up with Frank isn't right for him, but I think she's clearly better than the sleazy asshole doctor that they set Lucille Ball up with. But anyway, I digressed a little bit here. Let's move on. Obstetrics. I had to look this up because he says, my specialty is obstetrics. The doctor says this to Lucille Ball. And I didn't know what this meant, and it has to do with gynecology, so it's a vagina joke. So I had to look it up, but I did get the joke after I looked it up, of course. Only took off my shoes, she kissed ya. Oh, yeah, there's a part where Frank's like, I feel guilty being with this other woman, even though I'm not together with Lucille. And then he says, all this woman did was take off my shoes. But that's not all she did. She kissed you in the scene earlier. Does that not count because it happened earlier? That didn't make sense to me because it just was straight up not true. That's not all she did. She did more than take off your shoes. My next note is Three Bears reference comes out of left field. Yeah, it didn't seem to like connect with the rest of the story. All of a sudden, the woman that got set up on a date with Frank just says something about the Three Bears. It's like, my porridge is too hot, or something like that. Not that, but something like that. And just fell off to the cadence of the story. But anyway, my next plot point, or my next note, rather, is I wanted to see her bocce ball shot. So they play bocce ball at one point in this movie. And they show Frank's shot, and then they cut and they show Lucille throw her ball, but then they don't show what happens with the bocce ball. I wanted to see how her shot went. I was curious, being a person who kind of likes bocce ball. You know, I'm not an expert, but I've played it a few times and it's fun. I was curious of how her shot was, and they didn't show us that. My next note is, Drink for Helen is basically all hard alcohol. This part makes enough sense, I think, but it's pretty crazy. Like, they give her all the kids, they don't like that their dad is dating a new woman, so they are tasked with the role of getting them drinks. And they give her way too much booze. They pour in a whole bunch of different hard alcohol. And she clearly notices when she sips it, but she doesn't want to stir the pot. So she just drinks the whole thing. But then she acts later on like she didn't realize that the drink had a lot of alcohol. So there were some things with the storytelling there that maybe didn't make full and total sense. But moving on. Ooh, all the candles scare me, no flashlights. So flashlights existed. This was in the 60s. They were invented in 1902. Maybe they weren't readily available. Maybe they were a little more expensive. And there was a lot of people in this family. So maybe they could only afford candles. But, yeah, the lights went out, so you have all these candles. But, like, to me, that's a recipe for starting a fire. Giving all these little kids candles. I think for sure some shit would have hit the fan. But maybe I am just skeptical. Moving on, my next note is, she'd know Philip isn't sick, she's a nurse. So they have to call off their honeymoon because one of the kids is like, I'm sick, I have a fever. And they feel him and they're like, he has a fever. And and then his temperature gets taken and he's fine. But couldn't she have taken his temperature? She's a nurse. She could have done that stuff. So that didn't make sense to me. But moving on. Why did Doctor slide down the banister? So this just adds nothing. It doesn't add anything to the story. I don't know why they did it. But as the Doctor's leaving, he slides down the banister. Maybe to get out of there quicker. He seems to really want to leave because all these kids are making him anxious, it feels like. But it still seems a little weird why the Doctor slides down the banister. My next note is, so did the kids sleep in the parents' bed? So this is at the end of their wedding day. They get home and they finally put all the kids to bed, or so they think. And they're like, okay, we can finally relax and have a nice evening together. But then the kids come in and like, we're sleeping in your bed. But then they cut and they show them waking up together. And to me, I thought that was a little confusing because it's like, did the kids sleep with them, or is this a different day? I was confused by that. But yeah, next note. Some things are sexist, but it was the 60s. So it's very much, the gender roles are very much at play in this movie. And like, I can't like grade this movie to today's standards. That wouldn't be fair because this movie was made in the 60s. But some things I was like, I don't really like what they said there, what they did there. Specifically, I'll give one example. When Frank sets an alarm to get up, and he wakes up just so he can tell Lucille to wake up, and he gets to go back to bed because he's the man of the house, basically. And I thought that was, that was sexist. And there's a couple other parts of that in the movie, but again, it's the 60s. It was a different time. It doesn't completely excuse it, but again, I can't grade something for today's standards that is not of today. I don't think that's fair. So let's just move on. I felt like it was still noteworthy. They should have given equal amounts of food. Yes. So they do this in The Cheaper by the Dozen too, where they have like the one little kid who's like a little weaker, and he's like the runt of the family, the runt of the litter, or whatever. And the one kid, he's like struggling to get food. All the other kids are grabbing food. They should have it divvied up. Make sure each kid gets something, because the last kid isn't getting any food. All the kids are grabbing like 10 pieces of bacon. It's not fair. You gotta give little Philip his share of the bacon. Give little Philip his share of the toast. It's not fair. My next note is, what was the weird thing in her sandwich? So there's a part where one of the older daughters, she bites into a sandwich and then she like pulls something out. And I rewound it like 3 times and I could not figure out what it was. So the joke does not land if you don't know what the fuck was in it. It was something gross that she didn't like, she took out of the sandwich. But what was in the sandwich that was so gross? I don't know. Moving on. Catching mail from the jar from the cart is crazy. So there's a part where they're grocery shopping and Lucille Ball puts a jar of mail. Well, there's a bunch of jars of mail because, they got a bunch of kids, so they need a bunch of mail. Yeah. But one of the jars is in the cart, and I don't know if I feel like this was like a fluke. I don't think this was planned because it was a good take, and I think that they just used this take because it was interesting, and I think it worked out in a fluky sort of way. Because she put the mail in the cart, and then she turns around for a sec, and the mail is starting to fall off the cart, but then she grabs it just before it falls. And I don't think that was planned. I think that she just happened to catch that. So I thought that was pretty cool. Moving on, it's weird that they can afford all this shit. And yes, I know it's the 60s, and it was easier to afford things back then, but they have so many kids. They go into this big house, albeit it's a little bit run down, but it's still a huge house, and they have to buy all this food for all these kids. It is more believable in the 60s, but I wonder, even in 2005, where the other one takes place, when the other one was made, but still, I do think that it's a little crazy that all the costs that they would have to be spending on for this giant size of a family. But my last note is, I would have liked to see the freak out party. So at one point, one of the characters talks about a freak out party, the bad asshole boyfriend of one of the older daughters. You always gotta have the bad asshole boyfriend character. It's an integral part of these movies. And he's being the classic version of that character, being like, you gotta come have sex with me at this freak out party. But I would have liked to see the freak out party. That's one part I would have liked to see. But maybe they couldn't have showed it or something to keep the rating or something. I don't know. I am just speculating at this point. But that's the end of my review. Let's rate the movie and finish it. So this movie's not amazing, but it's not terrible either. It's definitely better than the Steve Martin Cheaper by the Dozen. And I haven't seen the Yours, Mine, and Ours from 2005, but this is probably better than that too. Most people seem to think that on the internet. But yeah, like I said, I'll have to review it for myself to find out for sure one day. But Yours, Mine, and Ours, 1968. Let's give it a 6. Let's give it a 6. Maybe point. Let's give it a little bit of sugar. 6.2. It's not. I think Rhymes for Young Ghouls was a little bit better. So we'll give it a little lower than Rhymes for Ghouls. But Yours, Mine, and Ours, 1968. It could have been better. There's some parts that maybe didn't age well. That's not the main problem with it. I'd say the main problem is some of the storytelling elements. Much like Rhymes for Young Ghouls, but this movie has a lot of jokes that worked, and it's harmless enough for a family movie, and it has definitely redeeming qualities, and it could have been a lot worse, and it's sort of, you can see why it's a beloved classic. It's inoffensive, it's, like I said, kind of funny. Now, it could have been a lot worse, so let's give it a 6.2 out of 10 Dougs for Yours, Mine, and Ours, the 1968 version. Here we go.